When Jesus told the apostles, go and make disciples, um, he was speaking to a group of men who would have to make contact with non-believers because most of the people at that time were not Christians. So true discipleship or comprehensive discipleship actually starts outside the church by making contact with non-believers. And my wife and I and others that we work with have 5 words that we use to describe the mind of a disciple maker. And the first one is pre-evangelism. That's making contact with non-believers. It's like Jesus eating and drinking with sinners. It's like him stopping and talking to Zacchaeus and all the contacts and inviting. It says he invited people to the house where he was staying. He's making contact with non-believers. He's having conversations with them. He is asking them questions. And this has yet nothing to do with evangelism, except it's a precursor to it. It's establishing relationships. It's valuing individuals as human beings. It's loving your neighbor as yourself. It's loving all men. And in some cases, it's even loving your enemy. So you're relating person to person, human to human, people created in the image of God. You see that they have value. And even if they never become Christians, God still values them. He still loves them. And we must do the same. So that's pre-evangelism. And then eventually, in conversation, you begin to talk about the gospel, the meaning of it, and that's where evangelism comes in. And then the next step, of course, is conversion. The person has to make a decision, and then the work really starts. Now you have to work with them and help them grow as people in their faith. And then finally, reproduction on their part. And that's the test of whether I'm a disciple maker or not. Do those that I disciple turn around and reproduce? If they're not reproducing, I'm not discipling. It's not full-fledged discipleship. So that to me is the mind of a disciple maker. Pre-evangelism, evangelism, conversion, maturation, or formation, and then reproduction. And it's not like I do those one at a time. It's what's going on inside my head all the time. They're all mixed together because you're meeting different people all throughout the day. You're meeting a believer, a non-believer, a seeker, a rejecter of the Christian faith, an atheist, an agnostic. And so you're starting at different levels with all people. But this mind is my agenda for how I relate to people around me. And, you just have to add on top of that, it's really a lot of fun. It's great to be able to live that way, to not always have people as a target, but to be able to treat them as human individuals and love them and have conversation, ask questions, and then the door slowly begins to open up and you can have this conversation. And then along with that, I think we have to say there are requisites for making this work. And the 4 requisites are, they're all around one word, and that is love. We're to love people. And so in the Bible, in the New Testament, we have 4 commands about love. We're to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So it starts with loving God. Number 2, we are to love one another. That word one another is used over 150 times in the New Testament. And its most common usage, and it's used mostly this way, is love one another as Christians. We're to serve each other. We're to comfort one another. We're to see ourselves as members of one another. Romans 15, Paul says you're able to confront each other and help each other grow. We can do all of these things, but the main command is love one another. And then the next is to love your neighbor as yourself. And the word neighbor is a really interesting word. It means who's nearest or who's next. Just think about that, who's nearest or who's next. When I'm at home, my neighbor literally is right next, the guy living next door to me or the couple living over here. They're literally my neighbors, and I'm supposed to love them. But if I'm walking down the street and there's a wounded person laying along the road, then he's nearest to me and he needs my care. So who's next or who's nearest? And the mindset of the disciple maker is, I'm available, Lord, who's near and who's next? And I want to be able to relate to them in a way that will maybe draw them a little closer to you. And then the last thing, of course, is love your enemies. Um, and it even goes ahead to say, and pray for them who despitefully use you. So it's not only that you have enemies, but they're despitefully using you sometimes, and you're going to pray for them. And I think we can identify enemies on two fronts: philosophical enemies who teach doctrines that are just directly opposed to the Christian faith, but then literally we have those who would like to do physical harm to us, just like they did Paul or Jesus or others, and others throughout history. Uh, so we have those two types of enemies, and our response to them is to love them and pray for them. What an amazing thing. And if we develop these things as our mindset, it changes the way we see the world. And of course, then the way we relate to people around us.